Hello, I'm George Liston CA, and welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. In describing the art of his fiction, the great novelist Honoré de Balzac used these words: "I stand beside the highway of life and hold up a mirror to all who pass by." In a way, Balzac also describes the challenge of the modern broadcast journalist, whose task is to reflect reality without yielding to the distortions of power, ignorance, bigotry, or wishful thinking. Since discovering the romance and freedom of radio as a college student, Sam Donaldson has spent his life in broadcasting. His career as a television journalist is greatly distinguished, and today is our opportunity to learn his thoughts on his work, his profession, and the world in which we live. Sam Donaldson, welcome to Dialogue.
Well, George, I'm glad to be here, but you do me too much honor with that introduction.
Well, it's going to go downhill from here.
You've heard the expression gilding the lily. You've just gilded the thorn bush, and I appreciate it.
Well, you deserve it, sir. And we'll see just how much you deserve it by going back to the book that started my admiration, your own book, 1987, but not out of date, Hold On, Mr. President. And you very famously, I think in that book, Sam, defended the aggressiveness for which you are so well known with words like this, that you saw your job as, and I quote, to put policy on record, to stand in for those who don't have power, and then most strikingly this, that the questions, the sort that you ask, don't do the damage, it's the answers that do. Do you still stand by that? Is that still the way you see the job that you do?
Oh, yes. I mean, you'd like to ask a question that's important from the standpoint of eliciting information the public really needs to know. You'd like to ask a question that has the facts and all of that. But even if you ask a silly question, and I think I probably did once or twice, it doesn't hurt a president or a senator or a human being for that matter if they answer it in a way that the public says, well, yeah, fine. I mean, I understand that. It's the answers that get them in trouble,
right? Not
the questions.
And you saw yourself very much as a surrogate for the public, or you still do. And I think there's one phrase that occurs in that book that I was quite struck by, that at times, almost as a district attorney, a prosecutor, someone who has to ferret things out, make things happen.
I was talking about the old David Brinkley show, the late, great David Brinkley. I had the privilege of working with him all the years he was at ABC. And on the show for the first few years, there were just three of us. David Brinkley, the man who was the host and the spark plug, and he would welcome a guest with his great politeness. Right. George F. Will, the columnist,
exactly,
who has great erudition and would question the guest from the standpoint of all of that. And then I said, and then it came to me. And I just played the role of Mr. District Attorney. Why'd you steal the money? Have you got an excuse? And it all seemed to work.
Yeah. You know, Sam, there are those who would contend that those functions are somewhat missing these days. And to take your philosophy, as we just heard from your own mouth and then from the book, and apply it to today's journalism, well, I'll level the charge as I've heard it myself. And it goes like this, that today's press, and particularly electronic media, has been insufficiently skeptical, insufficiently challenging of the president, of those in power, both in terms of the prelude to the current war and the conduct of this war since it started. I'd love to get your view of that we don't have that kind of aggressiveness, that kind of challenge.
To some extent, it may be true, but I think there's some very fine reporters still working the beat. And if it is true, I think there's some reasons. For instance, if I went back to the White House today, and some people say, oh, you ought to go back, I'd find it so much tougher. This administration has shut down sources of information better, if you want to use that term, or worse, if you want to use that term, than any in the 45 years that I've been in Washington.
Well, Frank Rich, writing in the New York Times this Sunday, calls it nothing less than an assault on the media. Is that?
Well, Frank was talking about this peculiar assault on the New York Times.
Right.
If it were just an argument over the last story they published, the administration didn't like, about the SWIFT program to track terrorist money, you could have that argument. But clearly it's not that. It's an assault on the Times and its credibility, and by extension, all the liberal news media. Now, I've seen this before. I see Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew launch an attack on the press. The nattering nabobs of negativism.
I remember that well.
The effete, impudent snobs. It didn't work. It's not going to work this time. I mean, when presidents get in trouble, and if I were president, and don't worry, folks, rest easily, that won't happen, you look for any way to try to divert the attention from your own problems.
Yeah. Well, I can grant you that point, Sam. But still going back to the onset of this war, the WMD question, the weapons of mass destruction, all those reports that later had to be discounted or even denied. Do you feel that there was insufficient, Mr. President, this is not true, or where are the facts behind this, or that kind of really putting it to them?
There may have been to some extent, but there are some other conditions. George W. Bush, after 9/11, was riding higher than any president that I've seen in my lifetime. His father, for a moment, had that, but his son had it for a long time.
Right.
Now, it's much more difficult to approach a president with that kind of standing. You say, well, why should it be? Why shouldn't you treat everybody equally? You should, George, but it's not in human nature. When presidents are down, it's easy to be tough.
Yeah.
Hi, Mr. President, they saying you're failing. How can you explain your failure? But when he has 92%, it's more difficult. And one of the reasons is, I was so lucky. Roone Arledge, the late Roone Arledge, was my boss, and he backed me. And if someone at the White House would call, and they did once in a while, and say, well, that Donaldson, he's really rude, and they really should replace him. Roone would listen very politely, and then I'd get a raise. I'm not sure that reporters today are backed by their bosses the way I was backed by mine.
That's an interesting point, Sam. That's a very interesting point. There's another one you just made, too, in that answer, because you brought into it what the public wants or what the public expects from the media at any given point. I mean, what's your sense of that right now? I mean, for example, in this age in which everyone is absolutely terrified, or seems to be, by terrorism, is the public itself as demanding of the media as it should be? I mean, White House notwithstanding.
Well, George, I think the public dislikes us, which may be healthy. I think a healthy dislike for the press has run through our entire history of our country. There have been lots of controversies, although when push comes to shove, the public clearly, the majority, wants a free press to exercise the oversight responsibility that you mentioned early on. I think at the moment people are confused. After 9/11, they marched behind the commander-in-chief. That's understandable. Anything he wanted to do, I don't care. I mean, throw grandmother against the wall at National Airport. Don't let her pee for the first hour after she leaves. Right. Whatever you want to do. Now I think the public is taking a more realistic view of the balance between our civil liberties and our society and the war to keep us safe. And the president, having embarked on this war in Iraq, which is draining his political power, draining his ability to get anything else done, has also come to the point where he's more realistic about his power. He's trimmed his sails just in the last few weeks.
You use some very big words and important words in that answer, Sam. Civil liberties, powers of the presidency, and so forth. Expound on that a bit. I mean, what does the press do? When the press succeeds at what you think it should be doing, what does the republic gain? When the press fails, the electronic media in particular, at what it should be doing, what do we lose?
Well, our failure is, if we fail, and we do often, not bringing information, not ferreting out the information. The press, by simply saying, you should feel this way or that way, the columnists, the editorial writers, really don't change public opinion. As you know, it's like Fox News. People who watch Fox News want to because they agree with Rupert Murdoch's philosophy. Rupert Murdoch, the owner of Fox, would be shocked if he actually listened to the phrase, you know, we report, you decide. He makes no bones that he wants his publications, the New York Post, Fox News, his London newspaper, all of his other publications, to reflect his conservative philosophy. Well and good. I have no problem with that. But people who listen to them or listen to editorials of the New York Times and read them, they already generally agree with those views. It's the information itself, the basic information that reporting brings, that causes people to say, well, wait a moment. This war has already cost us $320 billion. And there are estimates saying that it may cost $1 trillion. And we've lost about 2,600 U.S. troops. And the thousands of Iraqis that are being killed, they say to themselves, hold on a moment. Hold on, Mr. President.
Hold on, Mr. President. Hold on, Sam Donaldson. So it's the facts. It's the facts.
Oh,
then.
yeah.
It's getting the basic information out to people so they can make informed judgments.
I used to say that the quickest way to get elected president was have the New York Times endorse your opponent and have me say he can't win. I mean, you might as well take the rest of the campaign off. But if you bring information, people are not stupid. I always get a kick out of the politician, whether a president or someone else, who comes to the Sunday shows, and you ask him a basic question. and they flim-flam. They give you some sort of funny answer. It has nothing to do with the question, but it has something else. And they go home apparently thinking that no one saw through it.
Right.
Everyone out there saw through it.
Right. Right.
Everyone. I mean, people who watch these programs are not dumb.
They aren't. They certainly aren't, Sam. And in fact, you mentioned covering presidencies. And what was it? Johnson was the first president you covered?
Well, I went out of the White House when John F. Kennedy was president, but I never asked him a question. I was this little smaller reporter on the edge of the crew. Yes, I covered, not as White House correspondent for ABC, but I went on trips for ABC with Lyndon Johnson toward the end of his presidency.
Well, from Johnson right up to the current president, you've been covering the White House very well. I would certainly argue, I think many others. I'd like to focus, Sam, on a couple of presidencies in particular that you are particularly notable for having covered, Carter and Reagan. And this appears in the book, and I think it's still relevant now because Jimmy Carter is still very much with us and very active. You expressed, I think correctly, admiration for his foreign policy triumphs that might not have gotten the attention they deserved, or at least the respect they deserved. But you also expressed something else I'd love to get you to expand on, your own personal sense of ambivalence about that presidency. And I'm now, 2 decades later, I'm wondering, has that continued? Has it been resolved? What is your thought on the Carter presidency and Jimmy Carter?
Jimmy Carter was not a great national politician. I like politicians, and I think politics is a noble business. Politics is the art of the possible. It's bringing people together. You want to go to the movies. I want to stay home. Someone else wants to go someplace else. The politician arranges a compromise so that no one gets 100% of what they want, maybe, but they get enough that everyone feels fine. And then the good politician leaves $10 on the table so you can have bus fare rather than rob you completely. Jimmy Carter meant to do well in everything. He wanted to succeed, and he had ideas for the country. But as far as selling the country on those ideas, he was wanting.
Right.
And he surrounded himself, his loyalists from Georgia. Every president from the outside brings the loyalists who help win the election for them. I have no quarrel with that. But he also surrounded himself with people who are good people, but they didn't believe in what he wanted to do. They weren't loyal completely to him.
That's interesting.
And he tried to rectify it toward the end of his term by firing all of his cabinet. Half of them he replaced.
Was there too much attention to detail on his part?
Yes, much.
And not enough to the great overriding theme?
The famous story about how he checked off who played at the tennis court. Well, a president doesn't have time to decide who's going to play at the White House tennis court. Another thing he did, he came in, remember, at a time when we were hurting because of Watergate and Vietnam. He would say on the road in his campaign, to make us feel that we're good people, Watergate didn't hurt us, Vietnam didn't hurt us, the CIA didn't hurt us. Then when he came in, he decided he would do away with the pomp of the presidency. Big mistake. For the first 3 weeks, when Jimmy Carter traveled on private business in Washington, out to dinner or something, he stopped at the stoplights.
I remember
and there was no presidential seal on his car.
Right.
And he forbade the playing of Hail to the Chief.
But you think that would detracted from the majesty of the office?
Oh, yes, yes. We want our president not to be the guy next door,
Well,
George.
we have to. I mean, because our president is the head of government and head of state. We don't have a queen or a king.
That's right. And we want him to be someone we can look up to and say, oh, gee, there he goes. When Ronald Reagan was president, if he walked in a room, you didn't have to play Hail to the Chief. People just knew it. They sensed it. And the reaction was, there is the man.
I'm so glad you turned us to Ronald Reagan, because that's exactly what I want to ask you about right now. And I want to introduce something from that previous answer. You said that Carter might have been ill-served by an insufficiently enthusiastic staff. Reagan, many argue, was very well served. Some would say overserved. There was really his staff that did the work. Despite his own skills as a great communicator. Now, having covered him as well as you did, as closely as you did, what was your verdict on how he did?
The staff did the work. He wanted him to do the work. He made no bones about it. When George Shultz became Secretary of State after the first year, and General Haig was invited out, he said, I'm going to let George do it. It's just kind of an old expression.
I heard it.
And so he did that. And in his first term, he was well served by people. Jim Baker was the chief of staff. Don Regan was at the Treasury Department. George Shultz, all of that. And they did a good job. Mike Deaver set up his cameras just right. The second term, people moved around. And now it was on to Bitburg and the graves, unfortunately, of the SS. And he was selling arms to Iran in exchange of hostages. What had changed about Ronald Reagan? The people around him that he trusted to do his business had changed.
Yeah. I think that's very perceptive, Sam, because Iran-Contra, you know, one wonders how that would have happened, and you're saying it was the departure of those who had served him so well that made it possible.
To some extent. And it's, again, the old phrase, you know, with no one rid me of this meddlesome priest. Meaning, everyone knew he wanted to aid the Contras in Central America, the freedom fighters against Nicaragua. There's been a debate that goes on among people who covered the White House all these years. Did Ronald Reagan know that money, he knew about the sale of arms to Iran for hostages, but that money from that sale was being diverted to the Contras, which was illegal. It was against against the law. I don't think he did. I think people sort of knew Colonel Oliver North and others that he wanted to aid the Contras, and they sort of found a way. Well, the old man, you know, will do this, and he'll be pleased when the Contras win.
You know, Sam, when you take these two presidencies together, and of course they were contiguous, one succeeded the other, that they amount to an era. And what fascinated me, again, the thought was, came on me as I read the book and thought about our conversation. You had two defining historic moments. Under Jimmy Carter, we had, of course, the famous Iranian hostage crisis. And Ronald Reagan, the demise of what he famously characterized as the evil empire. You know, it was certainly, the wall would fall after he left, but it was certainly on his watch that all that happened. If you take those two things together, I really think you get the linchpin of the era we're now living in. In other words, the Cold War is over, but get ready for a restive Islamic world that has a lot of issues to take up with you. If that's true, Sam, and I'd love to get your opinion on that as an opinion, did we miss a call? By we, I mean the politicians, I mean the pundits, and I mean the press as well, that our world had fundamentally shifted.
It may have.
Right under our feet.
Because, George, if you live under, as I've lived, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but so far I've lived most of my life either under the Nazi tyranny, over there, fortunately I lived in this country, or the Cold War, and that mentality is hard to get rid of. And I think shifting gears became hard to get rid of. But I think the remarkable thing, and the thing we really have to worry about, is when I started in the news business, most of the rest of the world liked us. I mean, Americans, they liked Americans, and they liked America. Now, the fact is, I believe not only the polls, but my own experience, most of the world does not like us, and some significant portion of it hates us. Now, you can take the attitude, well, to heck with them, but if you do, you're going to lose. I mean, if it's my way or the highway for this country, it's going to be the highway. The world is out there, and we have to somehow repair the idea, meaning the shining city on the hill that Ronald Reagan loved to talk about, that's who we are, and that we're kind of people that you want to look up to.
Yeah. Sam, I've got to say that, just a moment of personal confession, I'm delighted you said that. I just can't be impartial about that statement. And it actually sets the stage for the question I'm going to ask you right now, but I've wanted to ask you ever since I met you. There's an incident in this book that will frame the question. 1979, you're visiting Nigeria with Jimmy Carter. And you're standing on the tarmac next to a Nigerian colonel, and you have a bantering exchange. The joke goes like this. You turn to the colonel and say something like, "Give us your oil." And he responds, "Give us your bombs." And I read that and I said, you know, that joke still plays well as kind of a first world, third world dividing line of the tensions we face, and perhaps some of the animosity we're gathering in the world, that they see us as wanting that, and at least certain of their countries want the power, prestige of the bomb.
And of course, we don't want them to have the bomb, and I understand that.
Yeah.
Do we want North Korea to have the bomb? Do we want Iran to have the bomb? But if we want to keep them from having the bomb, we've got to use more than our military power.
We have to address inequality, don't we?
We have to address inequality, and we have to address a lot of their concerns. I don't have the latest statistic, but just a few years ago, we, the United States, consumed 36% of the yearly resources of the world with 5% of the population. Well, that's wonderful for you and for me, George, but if we're going to look long range, for our grandchildren and their safety and their standard of living in the world, we better do something about that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I can only make this a chorus, Sam, quite frankly, because as I understand it, most of this world lives on less than $2 a day.
Well, yes, and a greater portion less than $1 a day.
Exactly.
Let me tell you a little story, if I may. In 1969, I went to India, And I was there for 2 weeks with my producer, and we did a lot of stories. And we had a driver who spoke better English than I do. And he was a good guy. And of course, the sedan that the company rented for us. And at the end of the time, we went to the airport. He brought us to the airport. And I said to the producer, you know, we ought to give him a little something. He's being paid. I reached in my pocket, and I came up with what I thought I could spare, $45. I gave him the $45, and I said, thank you so much. You've done a great job. He looked at it, and tears began to roll down, and he began to cry. And my first thought was, I've insulted him. Surely $45 is too little. I mean, for 2 weeks' work? Well, in New York, if you offered a sedan driver $45 for 2 weeks, he'd throw you in the gutter. Well, I was wrong. He was crying because I had just given him the mean average income, yearly income, for an Indian. 1969 was $45. Today it's $748.
Right.
Some improvement, but still not enough, not much.
That speaks volumes, Sam. As an old Peace Corps volunteer, I can...
Well, you know, George, you've been out in the world.
Yeah.
Here's a frightening statistic while I'm on a roll, if I may.
You may.
Only 18% of the American public, according to passports, has ever been out of the United States.
How many members of Congress have passports?
Good question. I
It's
think
a good question.
Probably all of them do, don't you?
No, they don't.
You don't think so?
Sam, I was shocked to hear. I can't quote it right now, but I'll bet you it's
But
low.
George, that's the problem. We could read or see or hear anecdotally how other people live, but until you're there, you watch their culture, you watch their religion, you see how they live, you see how they think, we can't really understand how to get along with them. I mean, how to do things which doesn't affect our ability to continue to live well,
right.
but at the same time gives them the opportunity
Sam,
to
would
live well.
Would it be too simple to say what you are saying is that our challenge is to understand this world and to relate to it?
First, we have to understand it. Understanding comes before action. Look what happens, George, when we act before we understand.
Right.
We have a recent example or two.
Yes, we do. And of course, it's going to be the role of the press to help that understanding come about. There's another aspect to this need to understand things, Sam, and it played into that Nigerian incident, and it underlies a lot of what tensions are these days. And it's the nuclear issue, it's the atomic issue. It's another part of, of what we're talking about. I don't know if many people know this, but you were an Army officer, and you witnessed an atomic explosion.
We did.
And you made the comment, which again I found gripping and kind of enigmatic in the book, that it literally changed you as I understood it for life. I mean, with that experience in your background, how do you look at our current impasse on these issues worldwide? I mean, how urgent do you see our need to solve this?
Well, it changed me in the sense that I suddenly became a believer in the power of the atomic weapon and the realization it was not just a larger weapon or a more deadly weapon, but it was one that, through all of its deadly aspects, could ultimately wipe us all off. Because when I watched that atomic bomb test in 1958, we had no test ban treaty. We in the Soviet Union and China were poisoning the atmosphere. I guess China had not yet joined the club, but the two of us. What we need to do, it seems to me, is yes, continue to work hard to, when I say prevent nations from acquiring the bomb, make it so that they don't feel the need to acquire the bomb. They don't feel that I've got to have this bomb because of my enemies, because of the United States.
For prestige
or
or for protection.
Now look what we've done with India. India is the largest democracy in the world. It's our friend, and I'm glad of that. But we have now broken the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which we ourselves guided to fruition by saying, well, in India's case, yes, we will sell them all of this material, and we will trust them.
Right, and not verify their,
that's right.
They've
given their word, they won't use it for military purposes. Well, I mean no disrespect toward the Indians or their word, but we can't do business in the world that way. Now, China is going to make the same deal with Pakistan, which on alternate Thursdays is our ally, but not in the northwest frontier, apparently, where Osama bin Laden hides. And then where does it stop? Which nation do we say, well, yes, we did it to India and China did it to Pakistan? Not you. I think it's a fool's errand to believe that we can control the world anymore that tightly. The only way we can control our destiny, it seems to me, is by making deals with the other countries favorable to us, but also favorable to them. That's what I meant by the old horse traders. Leave $10 on the table. Let them have car fare.
Yeah. Sam, are you talking about understanding this world and approaching it in what is philosophically a kind of multilateral sense? I mean, we can't dictate. We have to negotiate.
That's right. We have to take care of our own safety. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying for a moment that we lay down our arms and say, come and get us, mm-hmm. people of the world. But we can no longer, the Pax Americana that we could do after World War II is long since over.
Right.
We can't build fences. I mean, people say, well, on the southern border, we'll build a fence all the way from Tijuana down to Brownsville in the Gulf of Mexico. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess we could do it, George. We do have enough, well, come to think of it, we don't have enough money. We have huge deficits, mm-hmm. but we could do it. Mm-hmm. But what that would gain us is further enmity, number one, of all the peoples in Central America and South America, and number two, they'd come through the fence.
Yeah, yeah.
When they came through and over the Berlin Wall, folks, why do you think our fence is going to keep people who want to do something out? That's not the way to keep them out.
You're saying our power alone will not save us. I mean, we can't.
No.
I mean, there's a difference between being a shining city on the hill and being an island fortress that can't be sustained.
John Donne said it, no man is an island entire unto himself.
No nation either.
If a clod be washed away from Europe. The way we save ourselves from this flood of immigrants, it seems to me, is to help work to raise the standard of living.
Right.
Now, the guy in Michoacan, in the state of Michoacan in Mexico, who comes here because he can't feed his family there, but he can send back money from here. I think, for the most part, if he can feed his family there and have a good life, hey, doesn't need to go any place. He stays home. Now, that's not an overnight proposition. I understand that. But that's what we should work for, not building fences.
Sam, I would love to find a flaw in that. I'd love to challenge you on that, but I can't. I agree with that, as I have with so much else that you've said, and I think our audience has gained from it, too. Sam Donaldson, thank you so much.
Pleasure, George. Thank you.
It was all mine. And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Network. Dialogue is also on the MHC Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. And please, join us again right here next week. And thank you for watching. Sam Donaldson, thank you for talking.
Pleasure.
Next week on Dialogue.
And in a sense, that is the way all of economics starts to address poverty, by allowing people to concentrate and focus on what they can do and sell the surplus to other people who are doing something else. International trade, in the sense you've used the word trade, just broadens that set of horizons.